That seems like a very interesting article. Click here to find out how renewable energy is destroying Pluto. Let's find out how. Well, this was a typical example of rickrolling. Who here was actually tempted to click on this link to find out how using solar power on Earth is hurting our beloved celestial snowball, Pluto? This type of clickbait article is fairly common on social media advertisements or articles. Most of you, including myself, would ignore these ridiculous links, but you'd be surprised to see on how many people are actually attracted to misleading titles on social media. Social media is not unexclusive to me, where your friends simply share what they had for lunch and what they bought from the store. You encounter a lot of different materials, ranging from advertisements and news articles to political statements. According to Pew Research Center, 67% of Americans get their news from social media, and the other 30% heavily rely on it as their primary news source. This is a 6% increase from 2016, and this trend is constantly growing. It is also important to note that only 10% of social media users gain their information from more than 3 sources. It is evident that a clear majority encounters worldly perspectives from a very limited number of sources. While this might be simple statistics, and you might wonder, what is so bad about getting news from social media? The first and most obvious answer is because social media is a form of business. It is a business that feeds on our attention. We must remind ourselves that most social media newspapers and commentators are attention grabbers. Nowadays, even traditional news sources, such as CNN, use eye-catching headlines and exaggerations to gain as many followers as they can, as quickly as they can. I like to wager that my Pluto clickbait article would be shared at least 50,000 times on Facebook. But on a more serious note, here are some examples of how any type of news can spread like wildfire. On July of 2016, a satirical news website named WTOE5 published an article with the title, "Pope Francis Shocks World, Endorses Donald Trump for President, Releases Statement." In the midst of confusion about whether or not this was legitimate or wrong, the story was shared more than 960,000 times on Facebook over the course of 5 months. To put this into perspective, 20 best-performing election stories generated about 7.5 million shares during the election date of February to November. Now, let's compare this with the 20 top-performing false election stories from either satirical, hoax, or hyper-partisan news. These medias generated over 8.7 million shares, surpassing legitimate news by over 1.2 million shares. This phenomenon shows how we are returning to the era of yellow journalism, a 19th century form of journalism where sensational and vicious headlines overpowered well-reasoned forms of journalism. Thus, a question arises. In the midst of ever-increasing domination of sensational media over cyberspace, are you able to say no and provide a voice of reason? This is when the filter bubble phenomenon comes into play. A term first coined by internet activist Ali Pariser, it is an intellectual phenomenon where personalized search algorithms, such as Google personalized search or Facebook's newsfeed, provides users with information based on the analysis of users' history, click patterns, and geographic location. While this was intended to quickly provide personal information, it has isolated people from information that disagrees with the user's interest, confining them in an ideological bubble, and consequently preventing civic discourse. Due to this online filter bubble, we are slowly losing the ability to disagree with what we encounter through social media. We acclimate ourselves to political statements that flow around cyberspace and are given no options to face with a disagreement. Subsequently, we start to lose a middle ground. Rather than having our own distinct opinions, we start to accept social media news outlets as facts and become polarized to one side. This lack of communication, the creation of one's own bubble, brings forth identity politics to social media users. Without proper knowledge of the opposing viewpoint, we brand those who have a different opinion from us as inherently harmful, less educated, or flat out wrong. Rather than arguing against the other's arguments with well-reasoned logic, we now label the opposition as bigots and refuse to hear their opinions and justification for their beliefs. That is why it is now crucial for us to practice intelligent disagreement to what we encounter in social media than ever before. Rather than relying on a certain source on social media to augment our own opinions and create a safe space for ourselves, we should learn to accept disagreement and reconsider our perspectives about the world surrounding us. It is time to navigate beyond our own opinions and consider the wider world outside the bubble. Here is a good starting point. Start challenging your own assumptions by understanding what others say about a certain topic. If you support same-sex marriage, take some time to research why others are against it. If you're against reusable energy and believe that fossil fuel is a better alternative, then go on and read what the proposers of reusable energy has to say. If you read Fox News, start exploring CNN, and vice versa. Don't be guided under the hasty misconception that what you believe right now is absolutely correct, because our subjective opinions about worldly matters are not absolute. Now let's see how we can effectively engage social media news. Don't just skim over headlines. Take 5 good minutes of your time to read through the comment section and see what others have to say about the media that you are about to read. Above the silly comments, there are plenty of comments that seriously share their opinion on the matter. It won't be easy at first, but read through them and see how people interact with each other. You'll be more than surprised to see how people's staunch beliefs are debunked by logic, or witness how so many people rely on name-calling and in-group bias to advance their own arguments. Finally, and the most difficult step, question what you read or watch on social media before accepting them as facts. Just because it has a legitimate title, it does not mean that what is written there is factually true. Whether it be a product of extensive investigative journalism or a sensational news article that is based on underdogma appeals to simply grab attention and sway public opinion, give a second thought into whether or not this is a well-reasoned, factually correct reading material. Your perspectives and arguments deserve more than simply conforming to be a slave to your Facebook newsfeed. The most intellectual and creative minds are those who know how to disagree. History remembers those such as Galileo or Mandela, who faced others and stood up to their dissenters, rather than the conformers who hid from disagreement, locking themselves in their own perspectives. With the increasing domination of sensational, biased social media statements and people being trapped inside their own ideological bubble, today is the high time to overcome what social media intends to feed you and engage in intellectual debate. After all, who would want cute little Pluto to melt away for all eternity? Thank you very much.